All right. Today I will be looking at Twinkle Twinkle by Kaori Ekuni and translated by Emi Shimokawa. And this is definitely not the book that I thought I would be talking about, but the librarian at the school that I work at was recommending to a student, or the student body in general, in the newsletter, a book called Hotel Cactus by this author. And coming from a desert, I have a thing about cactuses, cacti, whatever, if you want to go Greek or Latin with the pluralization. And I thought the title was interesting, and it was written in katakana. And usually, when it comes to a katakana title, it means that it's a translated book. But in this case, it was not. It was a Japanese original. Then I set out to look and see if there was a translation, and there was not. But there was one other novel from this writer that has been translated, and it's this book, Twinkle Twinkle. And on the description page for the writer, she's listed as dubbed the female Murakami, which I laughed at. The teacher, the librarian rather, also laughed at it. We were both just utterly bewildered by this. But, just out of curiosity to see what the librarian was recommending to the students and what the students may be reading, I decided to pick up Twinkle Twinkle, even though it's definitely not a children's book. It's not something that you would, I think, usually find in a high school, or rather a junior high, but that's beside the point. So that's how I ended up finding this book, and I ended up reading it because this week is kind of test week at work, and so I have free time, and it's a very short book, so I thought I'd just sit down and read it while the students were testing, and it worked perfectly. So the plot summary of this book actually also kind of caught my attention as something that could be very interesting, where you have Mutsuki, who is a gay guy with a boyfriend, and you have Shoko, who is she has some kind of mental illness. It's not really super clear what it is. The book was originally published in 1991, so I don't know if maybe at that time Japan wasn't, I don't know what the stigma around mental health at that point is, but she just has kind of quote-unquote ambiguous mental illness, and she's also an alcoholic, so not really interested in a marriage. Mutsuki obviously isn't interested in a marriage, but the two go ahead and get married just to get their parents off their back. So, interesting premise. Lots of places you could go with it. It could just end up being kind of your typical TV drama type situation, which I think it definitely leads into more. But it also could potentially be an interesting sort of look into the culture and the time period and so on and so forth. So that's why I picked it up. That's why I read it. And that's how I read it, and that's the summary, and I'm trying to remember how to do this format because it's been a while. I've been really taking my time with Killing Commendatore. To whom would I recommend this book? This is one where really it's interesting. I think it's difficult to talk about the recommendation and not the facet where I had a hard time connecting with this book's primary conflict, because the primary conflict of the book is mostly around Mutsuki and Shoko having to get married in the first place to please their parents. Now, the thing with both of these people is once they get married, they move in together. They're not financially dependent on their parents. They're not getting any loans from their parents that are mentioned in the books. I think Shoko still lived with her parents before this, but she has a job. She has something that she does get paid for. So, and Mutsuki is actually a doctor, so he's quite well off. So, to me, the idea is that, these people would be so, not just that they have to get married to appease their parents, but then their parents are even telling them, get a baby, have a baby, blah, blah, blah. And that their parents have so much influence on their lives, where as a Westerner, I just tell them, I feel like I just at some point tell them to get lost. I either accept me for who I am or get out. Bye-bye. You birthing me does not obligate you to sit here and continue to tell me how to live my life, even after I'm an adult and completely independent. But I understand that in Japan, especially in the old days, the culture was very different. Things might be more different now in modern times, but it made it very difficult to relate. And I also don't know if that's my individual take on family and the family dynamic, where for me, I know I'm somebody who's very much, I like people, and whether somebody is or isn't family or blood related or whatever means very little to me. I either like you as a person or I don't like you as a person. Factors like that are not even secondary, that they're like a third or fourth or fifth thing down the list. Are we blood related? I don't care. There's been somebody that my grandmother has been telling me, like, oh, you have some cousin in Japan, go meet him sometimes, you two will get along great because you're both in Japan. And it's like, I don't know this person, I've never met this person in my life, this person doesn't know me, has never met me before in his life. It's like some cousin 3 times removed. Like, no. we might as well be complete strangers. The fact that somewhere down our family tree, our lineage, that we have a connection, it means nothing to me. So when the primary driving force is that sort of specific, I think that most people are either going to connect with it, this is why I sort of preface it so much. I don't know if it's more a cultural thing or it's more my individual thing, because I do know that there are some people in America who have very strong ties to their family, and even though they don't like their family, they don't want to disappoint them, or they have a hard time sort of escaping their parents' shadows, and etc. That means more to them. So culturally, individually, not my type of book, but I think that these are sort of, or when I say not my type of book, I mean, to me the answer throughout the whole book is simple: just tell your parents to fuck off and live on your own. And then Valera, no more conflict, no more drama. Because, like I said, it's not exactly like you guys are getting together every Christmas for your family Christmas dinner to begin with. But moving on to who I would recommend this book to, obviously somebody who's going to connect with that more and not get frustrated with it. But to me, this is a perfect example of a book club book, where a lot happens in a short amount of space. And I don't think it's a super deep book in the sense that the conflicts kind of arise and get resolved very quickly. It's sort of very episodic, so it makes it easy to read if you're busy. And even though it's not got a lot of depth to it, I think that the sort of circumstances that arise out of it will give people a lot of opinions on whether it's right or wrong. Again, like I said, me talking about my family and my sort of take it or leave it, fuck off attitude. Take that to a book club, have the conversation go around. It feels like the kind of story that would be great for that. And again, short, not difficult to read by any stretch of the imagination, not a lot of complicated vocabulary, not a lot of, you need to be part of the culture to get it type situations, I think. And so in that sense, I just think it would be a great book club book. Busy people can have a conversation and probably get a lot to talk about it with other people. But if you're more of a solo reader, more looking for something that's going to challenge you more, either a harsher view on society, a more in-depth look on society. So in both of those cases, I think of like Mieko Kamakami, who would definitely write a more scathing, more in-depth sort of look at the conflicts around this. Or if you're looking for something more introspective and more philosophical, which is what I tend to prefer in my books, a la, not to always bring him up, but Nosgard, Murakami, Dostoevsky, like that type of introspective book, this isn't it. But that doesn't mean it's bad, and I'm going to bring this up again because you may not have seen my other videos, but the reason that I really do want to phrase it as what book do you like, or to whom would I recommend this book, rather than would I recommend this book or would I not, is what I realized early on is that I very rarely read a book that is so bad that I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. And when I'm talking to an invisible audience, to say, would I recommend this book to you? I don't know you. So rather than try to make an universal judgment that ultimately really isn't a matter of recommendation, but is really just a question of did I like the book, I like to take a more neutral stance on to whom would I recommend this book, because I find it forces me to appreciate books from a different angle rather than just saying, being able to say necessarily that this isn't for me and then walk away from it. And this brings me to my pros and cons, which I kind of touched on already in the to whom would I recommend this for, but now I can expand on it a bit. Pros, like I said, it's very short, and the pacing is very quick. There's pretty much no downtime, and this is also helped by the fact that it's very sort of episodic in nature. And this is going to be a pro insofar as it makes for the pacing to be very quick, very snappy. So if you are a busy person, if you're the type of person who needs to do your reading on a train, listening to audiobooks, maybe, just around the house whenever you have a few minutes here or there, then this kind of snappy, short chapter, short pacing is really going to work for you. But these things that I'm saying are a pro could also be taken as a con depending on what you're looking for in the book. I like the writing. I think that it does first person. It has the problem of the two. I've talked about it before. Even though it's first person and it's telling it from multiple perspectives, when you're in one head, it's not super obvious which is Shoko and which is Mitsuki from the writing itself. But that's fine because it alternates every chapter. So even though it might take you a minute to, like, if I were to give you a chapter dry, you probably wouldn't know whose head you're in until somebody says, either Shoko or Mitsuki rather. And but I think it works in the context of this particular book, because I think what the author is really trying to get at here is the sort of way that these two respect each other, but the ways that they're both struggling. And to do that, she wants to put us in the I perspective. She wants to bring us into our characters' heads and hear their thoughts. And then she wants to show us the other side and see how the character, what they're meaning to do and the intentions behind their actions aren't the same as how their actions come across. And since that sort of conflict, the sort of person versus self-expression and how that expression is interpreted by somebody else is the core of the heart of the book, not necessarily the conflict, because the conflict I think is really between the parents, but it's at the heart of these two characters, because in a way it is a romance, and it's difficult to talk about it without spoiling anything, but I like what it does in the end with the romance, even though on the one hand, I don't read a lot of romance stories, so maybe it's just sappy and generic. But I think that the idea, at least in terms of the broader sort of dialogue that we have outside of the story, I'm willing to count the way that the story handles the conclusion and the relationship between the two characters as a pro, not necessarily in the context of the story itself and what works best for the story, which, by the way, it works fine for the story. It's not that. It's more a question of how many of these types of stories do I read? Not really very many. And how much do I think that this sort of view is healthy and a good way of looking at it, and more what I feel like is a positive message to end on. So in that sense, that's how I feel. But I also want to make it very clear that it's a very personal thing to call that a pro. And somebody may read this and walk away at the end of it feeling completely like it's a con and it just ruins everything and blah, 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 blah. Perspective, I try to keep the books as much in the books as possible. But I also, I think, to deny that we read books in certain cultural settings, in certain political contexts, is to kind of miss the point. And I think that even though this book was written in 91, given a lot of the sort of conflict that there is around gay marriage and identity right now, it has a positive message, I think, to take away from all that. So, like I said, cons, again, like I said, those points that make it a good quick read don't necessarily make for a deep philosophical read. And the only other con that I would really say is, personally, I feel like the resolution doesn't really resolve the core conflict. If anything, it feels like they bought themselves more time, but they didn't really address anything. And if anything, it was kind of a bit of a cruel trick that happened. Like, I feel like just an extra 10 pages or something, it felt like it was heading towards a certain conclusion, only for that conclusion to then get kicked down the road, but, to have a nice, happy ending. So that's my feeling on that. Moving on to the themes of this short little book. Obviously, Mitsuki being queer and Shoko having her problems and most people not taking them seriously, particularly as a woman. Both, you have simultaneously the mental health aspect and as a woman. And you put these two people together, and it's about how, the pressures of their parents forcing them into this situation. And yet, at the same time, and maybe this goes back to Pro, and I'm in the spoiler territory already, but whatever. It doesn't hammer home their parents. The emphasis on the story is really on their relationship, and how, despite the fact that both of them come from such different backgrounds and have no interest in being together romantically in a sexual sense, they both still ultimately come to love each other and find that they live well together and rely and depend upon one another, even outside of what we would consider a traditional romance. And I think this is sort of where I don't tend to read a lot of these books, so it's difficult for me to say, what is just sort of gushy, feel good, wear a crown on your head and sing Kumbaya at the end, we're all happily ever after. As a Spanish police officer burns in the stake in the middle of the town square. Anyway, it may be a sappy, saccharine ending, but I think the idea of Shoko being okay with Mutsuki and his relationship with Kon, and the three of them sort of having this very offbeat relationship, is handled pretty well. I like that it doesn't go super deep into the melodrama, and the fact that these people are weird, and I don't mean weird in like a derogatory sense. I mean weird in the sense that they're social outcasts who are very much aware of their status as being social outcasts, and consequently have abandoned trying to put up the perception of being normal, at least outside of, well, for Shoko, Shoko and Kon both don't give a shit about how society views them. Mutsuki only really puts up with it for work, but otherwise, they live their own lives in their own way, separate to the sort of pressure to conform to societal expectations, and they're able to find a way to work together and be happy together in such a way that they're not tripping up anybody or ruining anybody else's lives, because this is where I come back to the greatest conflict in the story is between them and their parents. And ultimately, a parent only has so much control over their child's life. At some point, a child needs to be able to stand on their own. But that dynamic being there in the book, and sort of the book ending with a sort of positive affirmation that the three of them will probably be okay, I think is, like I said, a positive takeaway for people who do end up on the sort of fringes of society and feel like they just can't fit in, to find a community where they belong and where they can be happy in such a way that it's not sort of imposing on anybody else. And when I say imposing on anybody else, I feel like I'm touching on a landmine, but I'm just thinking of sort of extreme fringe cases where sometimes people get public with certain things that make other people uncomfortable, and then things get really, really complicated. And that's the thing sort of with this story that I think is so specific to it is, they're not out here, they're not out trying to make anybody else uncomfortable or whatever. They're just trying to live their lives with these sort of complications. I don't want to say problems, like in Shoko's case, it's a problem in the sense that she has a mental health issue that nobody's taking seriously, but like with Mutsuki, being gay isn't a problem exclusively, so that's why I'm being very careful with my verbiage here. The troubles and challenges that they face. But my problem with the sort of parents thing is, like I said, it doesn't get resolved. I mentioned that the book doesn't have an ending in the pros and cons section of it, but to sort of go in a little bit more detail, in order to try and save Shoko's relationship with her best friend, Mutsuki goes and tells her friend that the marriage is a sham. And then the best friend goes and tells Shoko's parents, which then causes Shoko parents to get annoyed. And because this whole thing was an arranged marriage, all the parents get together. And the parents are... you sort of have this sort of peak conflict in the book where the parents are on both sides of the table throwing accusations at each other, while the married couple sit there basically just forced into silence while their families go at it. And it's like, it's a decent picture of the situation, but at the end of it, there's no resolution. And then we move into Kon seeming to disappear for a while, and this leads to Shoko convincing Mutsuki to talk to her parents and say that he's broken up with Kon, only for Kon to come back. Turns out he was only gone temporarily, and this whole thing seems to have been a conversation between Mutsuki and Kon to convince Mutsuki, or sorry, not Mutsuki. This whole thing seems to be a conversation between Shoko, or conspiracy between Shoko and Kon to convince Mutsuki to lie to Shoko's parents that he's broken up with Kon and is no longer a homosexual, even though he is, and he openly said that he didn't want to lie to Shoko's parents because he doesn't believe in lying and is fundamentally an honest person. So that's a pretty fucking huge violation of trust for the book to just kind of end on. And again, with Kon still being in the picture, it's really only a matter of time, and Mutsuki being fundamentally an honest person, it's really only a matter of time until they find themselves back in the exact same situation. So ultimately, nothing's been resolved in that sense. I'm satisfied with the ending insofar as I think it's great that that they're able to work together, and they're able to sort of find ways to be happy with each of their own preferences, but the conflicts around the story are just left so wide open that it feels more like something like the author just kind of got bored and quit, rather than that there's any real resolution. But I can only be so mad because, again, it's a super short book. There's not a whole lot of depth to it in the first place. Shoko's mental illness is just kind of like vague mental illness. I don't know what it is. Mutsuki's kind of greatest problem is trying to understand Shoko, but he's human, and I like the fact that there are layers to him, but ultimately he is exactly the kind of calm, collected person who generally can manage somebody as high stress as Shoko, and Kon is barely a character. We don't really get much information about him anyway, so I don't know. It's not like an incredible book or anything, but I also don't want to sound like I hated it either. At the end of the day, just not quite my thing, but hopefully it's somebody's thing. And I've spent longer talking about this than I think I did My Name is Red, but that should give you an idea of like how I am with reviews. Sometimes, I don't know, like I said, with My Name is Red, there was so much in that book to talk about that I felt like every word I said only made it worse, whereas with this book, I don't really have anything more to say. We're at 24 minutes, and I feel like I've exhausted just about every single thing there is that I can say about this book. So, okay. Outside of this book, This author has not had any of her other works translated, which I kind of surprised because supposedly she is kind of a bigger name, and as a female literature author publishing shorter books, she seems like she'd be a good choice. Or I wouldn't be surprised, but maybe it's the fact that people are going for more scathing insights or aspects sort of on feminism or on the type of social oppression. It seem to be kind of the stories coming out of Japan, either scathing feminist takes or cozy stories about cats and cafes. That's your dichotomy right now for Japanese fiction. What a goofy time to be alive. Anyway, see you next time. I'm about halfway through Killing Commendatore, so still not sure what'll be next. And yeah.